So what we're doing in live time is we're saying, when the history books are written, we're showing this to you now. And you knew damn well this was happening. No one could say they didn't know. And we're doing it in a way that Western media can't, certainly British media can't. It's trapped in this sort of rather ludicrous, bogus two-sidesism. It's very hard to see the Israeli actions as anything other than punitive slaughter and ethnic cleansing. And if they're going to start prosecuting every sniper who shot an unarmed person in Gaza, they're not going to have any snipers left.
Wow.
Since the film came out last week, there has been a flurry of Hebrew language activity on social media, of people frantically deleting their social media accounts. But it's too late, we saved it all.
So hello and welcome back to Palestine Deep Dive. My name is Ahmed Alnaouq, and today we're interviewing a very special guest to me personally, Richard Sanders, who is an award-winning film director with over 25 years of experience. Richard, we have met many times during the past 2 years. I think the first time it was during a podcast I did with you about Labor Files. And then you interviewed me for the 7th of October documentary. And now we're interviewing you again for another documentary that you recently produced. It is called Investigating War Crimes. So tell me more about it. What is it about?
Okay, it's called Investigating War Crimes on YouTube. As far as I'm concerned, it's called Gaza. There was a bit of a generation divide within Al Jazeera on this. Us old people wanted a nice, classic, simple name. Young people said, yes, but no one will be able to find that on YouTube. Anyway, whatever. Investigating War Crimes, Al Jazeera is how you will find it on YouTube. It's a fairly simple film in a way. It takes as its starting point this extraordinary proliferation of postings by Israeli soldiers on social media. Increasingly in recent years with social media, of course, conflicts have been sort of live streamed almost, as it were. The extraordinary thing about this war is that the Israeli authorities, the Israeli military authorities, seem to be quite happy to let them do this. And so you have this extraordinary treasure trove of material which absolutely lays bare, firstly, the culture of the Israeli military in a way that is very, very unflattering to the Israeli military. But also our contention is that they may well expose a large number of war crimes. So really, I mean, it's to a degree, it's the Gaza war told through Israelis' own voices. And we have Israeli politicians and the Israeli public's social media as well. And then we juxtapose that with the voices of Palestinians. We had some excellent people filmed for us on the ground in Gaza, obviously something we couldn't do, but some remarkable interviews done on the ground in Gaza. So you get the juxtaposition of the Israeli perspective through these extraordinary videos with the appalling experience of Palestinians on the ground.
You know, Richard, for many months from now, actually, I started to avoid watching videos that come from Gaza, videos of horror, of killing, of graphic footage, and also the videos that came from the Israeli army and the Israeli military. I started avoiding them many months from now. But then I had to watch this documentary that you made, and it made me depressed. All of this evidence, all of this footage that came from Israel, that came from Gaza, all says that Israel is committing war crimes, genocide. And my question to you, why did you do that? Because personally, even if you have noticed on my Twitter, I stopped being active on Twitter because I thought our voices don't matter, our stories don't matter. We have been screaming to the world from the darkness, from Gaza, telling them about what's happening in Gaza, the war crimes, the genocide, the starvation, and everything. And that did not change anything. And the war continues. So why did you feel compelled
What's
to
the
do
point?
this documentary?
I mean, Mohammed Alnaouq, the young journalist in our film, makes exactly this point. I mean, Mohammed has almost been killed so many times. It's ridiculous. Yeah. He's not, and he says at the end of the film, what was the point? What was the point? So in a way, yes, what's the point of me doing it? It's for a historical record. And also, it's there. The film is a j'accuse. The point Susan Abelhawa makes at the beginning of the film, no one can say they didn't know. So what we're doing in live time is we're saying, when the history books are written, we're showing this to you now, and you knew damn well this was happening. No one could say they didn't know. And we're doing it in a way that Western media can't, certainly British media can't. It's trapped in this sort of rather ludicrous, bogus two-sidesism. And as you say, that the evidence of war crimes is absolutely overwhelming. Yet the BBC will insist on this sort of two-sidesism and giving huge weight to Israeli denial. So if you'll watch the BBC, and there'll be yet another attack on a UN school, on displaced people in UN, and the BBC will give huge space to the Israelis' claim that it was a Hamas base, and sometimes don't actually put the denial in. So if you're watching it, if you're relying on British media, you'd have the impression that it's sort of contested. It's a sort of an issue whether UN schools and mosques and so on are being used as bases. Again, I would point people towards this enormous trove of evidence, the Israeli soldiers' own videos, which they reveal contempt for the civilian population. They reveal the most appalling, disrespectful, racist behavior, as well as potential war crimes. What they don't reveal is combat. You almost never see them actually fighting Hamas. Every now and then you see them all firing their guns off, but they're sort of standing up and there's nothing coming back the other way. So, there have been certainly periods in this war, and I think we're in one at the moment, where it's very hard to see the Israeli actions as anything other than punitive slaughter and ethnic cleansing. At the moment, they are quite clearly doing the final ethnic cleansing of the area north of the Wadi Gaza. It's blindingly obvious, and you would never get that watching the BBC. You'd never grasp that.
Why is that the case? Now, when I watched that documentary, tens or maybe hundreds of footage came from the Israeli army themselves taking videos of the crimes that they're committing. So there's an abundance of evidence of the war crimes that Israel is committing in Gaza, but we haven't seen any of that in the mainstream media. Why can't they just report the truth from Gaza?
This is a conversation
Why is it only Al Jazeera that does that?
It's a conversation you and I have had. It's a conversation I've had with Radakami and with many Palestinians. Simple bewilderment. Because in the West, sort of to stand up for Western white people for a moment, in the late 20th century, we did grasp that colonialism, and particularly settler colonialism, wasn't on. You can't do that. You can't just turn up in other people's countries. And we just have this blind spot about Israel. We don't grasp that that's what it is, that it's a racist ethno-state. It's a settler colonial enterprise rooted in dispossession, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid. It is, for some reason, it is seen in the West as a complicated issue rather than those things. I'd actually really love to make a big TV history series called Israel and the West to really pick this apart, because the question you're asking me in a way is a huge question. And I think you'd need, and I'm not sure I know the answer right now, and I think you'd need 3 hours of television to answer it. I think the two very simple off the top of my head answers. One, in Europe, inevitably perhaps we can't help but see Israel through the prism of the Holocaust. Support for Israel is paying off our own historics. It's franchising out our guilt to the Palestinians. And of course, quite obviously, Israel serves Western interests. It is an American aircraft carrier in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, but as a journalist, you have to be neutral. You shouldn't have all of these perceptions in your mind.
You see, I think it's interesting. I think the BBC and ITV and so on would regard themselves as neutral. And you watch the way the BBC reports it, they report it as, it's complicated, there's two sides to this. Now, for them, that is neutrality. Whereas the equivalence that the BBC and others impose, we until we're blue in the face, we point out there is no equivalence between an all-powerful occupying military power backed by the world's only superpower, illegally occupying land, illegally under international law on the one hand, and on the other hand, a prostrate, powerless, occupied, oppressed, dispossessed people. There is no equivalence. There's no on the one hand this, on the other hand that, but there's just this blind spot.
For so many years, we have been criticizing the mainstream media, but here at Palestine Deep Dive, we are creating a platform, an alternative in which Palestinian voices are front and center. We are picking the questions, we are picking the guests, and we are leading the conversation. If you like what we do, please consider supporting Palestine Deep Dive. Become a monthly subscriber by donating as little as £1 a month. Let's go back to the documentary. You have put together hundreds of footage from Israeli soldiers who are filming themselves committing war crimes. Can you remember what was the worst scenes you saw from the Israeli army?
Well, you see an awful lot of wanton destruction, of smashing up people's houses, rifling through women's underwear, making stupid jokes. The thing that you see less often, but which is there, is killing people. And there's one video we highlight, which I notice has disappeared today from YouTube. And it's the sort of commemorative video. It's the souvenir video, if you like, of the 202nd Paratroopers Battalion. And there, in the middle of it, 3 occasions, you have unarmed men being shot by snipers. And in all 3 instances, the men are clearly unarmed. They're quite clearly unarmed. And they've stuck this on YouTube. The astonishing sense of impunity.
What is their justification for doing that? So they're not only killing the people, but also filming themselves doing that.
Well, they would. I'm sure they would argue that they might not have been armed at that moment, but they were combatants. But I mean, that would be their argument. But to film it and put it online, I mean, they're commemorating what they see as their great achievements. But it does speak to this astonishing sense of impunity, that they just don't have to answer for their actions.
They could claim that they have killed people who were armed before they shot.
Yeah, but they clearly don't have any footage of themselves killing armed people. As I point out, there's almost no footage of.
Yeah, but at the same time, we know that they also killed children. They sniped children.
Yeah, well,
they killed women who were raising white flags.
Well, of course, that one there is a shot of that, but although not taken by soldiers, that was one Middle East I got hold of. No, I mean they're not putting pictures of themselves up shooting children, but they clearly feel it's fair enough to be shooting unarmed adult men.
And also in another case, we saw them. On many of the footage that we've seen, we saw Israeli army soldiers using Palestinians as a human shields, not only in Gaza but also in the West Bank.
This really, makes me extremely angry. Whenever Israeli politicians or Western politicians are confronted with the appalling death toll, every time what they will say is, but
Hamas using them as a human shield.
Hamas uses the population.
There's no evidence whatsoever about
It's
that.
extraordinary. I mean, you really don't have to do, complicated research to find this out. And in 2009, 2014, analysis was done. Now, I think in 2014, one of the human rights organizations might have found one incident where rockets were fired from next to an apartment, that sort of thing. But I mean, the idea that the Hamas are sort of forcing the civilian population to stand in front of them is absurd. Yes, they and the civilian population share the same very small bit of territory, but there's not a lot they can do about that. And also Maher Husseini from Euromed Human Rights Monitor in our film makes an incredibly important point. There is absolutely nothing in the behavior of the Israelis for the last year to make you think that the presence of a civilian would lead to them holding their fire. There is clearly no regard whatsoever for civilian life. So what would be the point of using civilian shields. And it drives me absolutely, it's an area where I think the Western media is criminally complicit. Because that is the justification all the time, and I can get an 18-year-old undergraduate to research this, and in 10 minutes they'd have debunked it. Why the BBC isn't able to fact check this, and it just goes completely unquestioned. The Israeli ambassador will sit there and say this, and they'll all just sit there nodding. And as you say, on the other hand, what there is a massive evidence of is the Israelis using Palestinian civilians as human shields. Interesting thing. Again, you just research that. You read Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, the UN reports from previous conflicts, and they all testify to this. And in the West Bank, you get the same thing. In this current conflict, it's clearly happening again. And quite an interesting thing, we spoke to 6 people who'd been used as human shields. In each case, we didn't speak to them because we'd been told they were used as a human shield. We were speaking to them about something else. And purely coincidentally, they'd been used as a human shield.
That tells you that so many other Palestinians were subjected
It's clearly systematic, as Maher Husseini says.
Yeah.
They've done a study of this. And it seems to be the case, absolutely, that when Palestinians are first detained, they tend to be held within the Strip for sort of 2, 3, 4 days. And in that period, they are invariably used.
And there are multiple evidence of Palestinians being used as the human shields. We have seen the footage, we have seen the testimony from the people in Gaza, and yet we haven't seen any of the mainstream media talking about it.
I know, it's extraordinary, and it makes them complicit. So this is the thing, and this is in a way going back to your question, why bother to make the film? Al Jazeera was absolutely determined we're not going to be complicit. In this. Yeah, I mean, you watch the Israelis. Israeli foreign policy, in a way, is very, very simple. It consists of a single question: what can we get away with? What can we get away with? And what the Israelis are doing, yes, they would love to impose the Israeli narrative entirely. Yes, they'd love the New York Times and the BBC to be simple mouthpieces for the Israeli point of view. But more intelligent Zionists, the more subtle Zionists, realize that actually much more effective is simply make it contested. Make it contested. Because the BBC doesn't simply spout Israeli propaganda, but make it contested, make it complicated, rather than a crime.
Yeah. And what is the obsession with the Israeli soldiers after they have killed the people in the houses that they enter, wearing women's underwear? What is this obsession? Well, why do they do that?
Well, I think you need a psychiatrist sitting here to pick that apart. I mean, my guess, it's quite repellent, and it's dehumanizing, and it's especially.
It's not fun. I mean, like when I watch it, it's disgusting. It's not fun. Why do they do it?
Yeah, I imagine they think they are exposing the hypocrisy of a conservative Muslim society. I would imagine that's what's going on in their heads. But it's frankly, in my film,
what does that even mean, Amy?
I know. I mean, it doesn't bear any scrutiny. But there's an astonishing amount of this stuff, and they post pictures of themselves on Tinder and Bumble and these dating apps with, women's underwear.
They find it attractive to do that.
Exactly. Well, they will appeal to what sort of Israeli woman thinks? Well, it's extraordinary and it's repulsive.
And then we have also seen footage of Israeli soldiers raping Palestinians and even having dogs rape the Palestinians. Why would a human being make a dog rape another human being? What kind of mentality do? Yes,
we don't have footage of that. We have an eyewitness account of that. Yeah, a testimony of that.
Oh, sorry.
I suspect here, and here we come back to our previous film about October the 7th, and the enormous importance of rape mythology, rape and babies. Okay, which one of the central point of our October the 7th film was that there is absolutely no evidence that there was widespread and systematic rape. I mean, we're careful not to rule out the possibility that it happened on October the 7th, but there's no evidence to support the idea that it's widespread and systematic. But rape and babies sort of lower the bar. And once you've accused people of rape and killing babies, you've dehumanized them and you can do whatever you want to them. Now, I suspect Israeli soldiers are infected with the idea that all these people are rapists. And so they I would imagine they think they're getting revenge for that. But, male rape is quite clearly absolutely systematic in these detention centers.
Do you know the Palestinian dish maglouba?
No.
The maglouba is like the rice which we flip it upside down.
Oh, I probably would if I saw it, yeah.
Yeah, so this is our reality. It's maglouba. It's like everything is upside down. The Israelis accuse the Palestinians of using Palestinians as a human shields, that Hamas is killing babies, beheading babies, rape as a system of war, as a method of war. But on the reality on the ground, they are the ones who do that. And then unfortunately we see the media repeating the lies of the Israelis that has no justification, that has no grounds, and ignoring all the reports, all the testimony, all the evidence, all the footage that come from the Palestinians.
Every accusation is a confession, as they say.
I don't know what to say. So let me go back to something that you mentioned in your introduction. And you said that the Israeli soldiers were killing the Palestinians, torturing them, using them as human shields, and then take footage, film that, and then post that online. What is the response from the Israeli army?
They said they were going to crack down on it. This doesn't reflect the values of the IDF, and they don't seem to have. I mean, it doesn't seem to bother them. It just doesn't.
It seems to me that they're encouraging it, actually.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it reflects so badly on them. It's very interesting. Since the film came out last week, there has been a flurry of Hebrew language activity on social media, of people frantically deleting their social media accounts. But it's too late. We saved it all.
Mm-hmm. Well, where did you get all of this footage?
Most of it just from Twitter, Facebook.
But you also identify the soldiers who took these films.
Yeah, and this is the thing, you see. I thought at the beginning of this, we're going to have to employ people to do a massive what they call OSINT, geolocation, facial recognition. You don't need to. They post it on their own Facebook pages in their own name, give you a description of what it is and where and when it happened. I mean, it couldn't have been made easier for us.
Yeah, but you also knew that they were from which...
Yeah, they identify themselves.
They identify themselves.
Yeah, identify themselves. It's extraordinary.
But for me, it's very difficult to understand why would a human being commit a war crime and then film it and post about it. And post it. What is this mentality? How can we understand it?
You'd have to ask them. I mean, it's been an odd feature throughout history, from the Nazis to Saddam Hussein. People do have this strange compulsion to record their own atrocities. But I mean, the existence of social media just places it on a whole nother level.
Do we know if the Israeli army disciplined some of these soldiers who killed civilians or men and posted the footage of that?
No, I mean, they certainly haven't so far. As I say, the 202nd Paratroopers Battalion video has now come down from YouTube. I'd be amazed if they prosecute them. They might ask a few questions internally, but I'd be absolutely... I mean, if they're going to start prosecuting every sniper who shot an unarmed person in Gaza, they're not going to have any snipers left.
Wow. And these soldiers that you have identified in this documentary, do you know if these soldiers are dual citizens?
Well, many of them clearly are. I mean, you can see it in the footage. And as you watch through the videos,
we heard English and French.
Yeah, you can hear English spoken, French spoken, the Americans, South Africans. A lot of them are dual nationals. Clearly, a lot of them are dual nationals.
So let's imagine that the British government, or maybe they have already identified that some of their own citizens are fighting in the Israeli army and they have committed war crimes. Does the British government do anything about it? Do they investigate?
You'd have to ask them, but they certainly ought to. I mean, under international law, they certainly ought to. And the British guy who pops up in our film is rifling through someone's underwear drawer, which is it's revolting to behold. It's not a crime, but
yeah, and many of these footage that you collected, it was of soldiers posting these clips on their social media. So how does the Israeli community or the Israeli society react to these?
It's very
videos?
popular. I mean, you can see that
Popular.
You can see the likes and the laughter emojis on the bottom.
They're not
of
disgusted with
them.
that.
No. This is the thing you see. Now, this is, I think, a very important point about the film. It's not as if we've dug around and identified the most unattractive corners of Israeli society. This is absolutely general, and it's in Israeli mainstream media as well. Just listen to the rhetoric being used by mainstream pundits and by Israeli politicians. Just listen to Israeli politicians talk, especially when they're talking in Hebrew. Again, coming back to the central idea of the film, no one can say they didn't know. In the West, we often, when people aren't overtly supportive of Israel, the rhetoric you tend to get is, oh, it's complicated, it's nuanced, blah, blah, blah. And part of the point of the film is to say, listen to Israelis, listen to Israeli soldiers, politicians, journalists, pundits, and the general public. They don't think it's complicated. There's nothing nuanced or complicated about their language at all. Much of it is overtly genocidal. When it's not, it tends to be in favor of ethnic cleansing. There's no complexity and nuance in the way Israelis themselves speak at all.
It's very difficult to digest all of that. And then, more than that, not just only encouraging them, but we know when some Israeli soldiers raped Palestinians in Sidi Timan, some of the Israeli citizens protested against arresting the soldiers who committed the rape. What does that tell us about the society?
You just have to draw your own conclusions. Yes, I mean, that's right. So they eventually arrested 9 soldiers at Sidi Timan, I think under pressure from the ICC and under pressure from allies. Yes, there were these sort of demonstrations. People stormed the base to protest at this. Very interesting. I think it's important to keep an eye on how those cases progress. I think 4 of them have been released. I could be wrong. But it'd be very, there's a strong possibility that those cases will be quietly dropped further down the line. So I think it's important to keep international scrutiny on them.
And in the documentary, we also saw that you interviewed Matt Kennard of Declassified, who revealed for the first time that the British military is flying spy planes over Gaza from Akrotiri in Cyprus. So, what do you think these planes are? What are
right.
They
So again, firstly, this is the thing we've done in a few of our documentaries where we acknowledge the contribution of independent media. We're not going to pass this off as our own reporting. On the film about October the 7th, obviously we've done a lot of our own research, but there's quite a lot of stuff we were just drawing from independent media, which is, in this instance, is just so much better than mainstream media. Now, Matt's reporting, basically, it's broader than we had found time for in the film. RAF Akrotiri is clearly a hub for Western support for the conflict in Israel. You have these enormous cargo planes, British cargo planes going as well, which the British government says contain medicines and diplomats. And you're like, well, that's a lot of aspirins. It's and clearly the suspicion would be that they're carrying American military hardware for them. But the specific thing was these surveillance flights. Now, Matt had identified over 1,000 hours of surveillance footage shot between December and March. Now, they say this is all to do with hostage rescue. There were 2 British hostages in the Gaza Strip who, by definition, they didn't know where they were. Again, the very strong suspicion is that the Israelis are being handed targeting information by the British. Very important point to make as well. There's been no let-up in this since July the 4th, since the new government came in. Those surveillance flights continue exactly as before.
Even with the new Labour government?
Yeah. No change at all.
The Labour government said that they are suspending 30 arms exports.
Yes, but which leaves the majority of our arms exports in place. I mean, of course, I think with us, it's probably the use of our RAF Akrotiri and these surveillance flights that are our main contribution. We don't actually supply that many arms to Israel. As you'll know, the main suppliers are the US and also Germany. Germany supplies an extraordinary amount of weaponry to the Americans. Yeah, in a way, it's symbolic, I guess, but they suspended the bare minimum they had to address concerns about international law.
Why does the UK has to do all of that? To support Israel, send these
well, that
spy
returns to our
planes?
earlier question, doesn't it, about why the West, is so tied to Israel. But again, it's terribly important to say that it's a question that it's not just lefties or like you and me ask. It's a question the broader public is now asking: why on earth do we take it as given we're aligned with Israel? Why?
Although we know that the vast majority of the British public are not sympathetic to Israel right now.
Well, the latest opinion polls show 2/3 of people have a negative opinion.
A negative
Opinion of Israel. And that's a fairly sharp deterioration. Previously, I think it was about 50%. But a far smaller percent had a positive view. I mean, there's
Like
quite a few,
16%.
yeah, something like that. There was a big chunk of don't knows. But now, yes, I mean, 2/3 are quite clear they have a negative view.
What does that tell you about the UK government?
Well, I don't know. It's very strange, and the UK media they're just completely out of touch on this issue. It's very odd. It's very strange.
What's the language that we need to use right now when we describe the West's ties to Israel? Is it complicit?
It's complicit. It is.
Only I would say they're participant of the genocide, not only complicit.
Yeah, a party to the conflict. Or, I'm not an international law expert, but they're clearly complicit. Yeah.
As a British person, we know that Britain has a significant role in this genocide by all its ties with Israel, the diplomatic support, the media support, and all of what you know, historically as well, for Balfour Declaration and the British mandate and facilitating the Zionist immigration to Palestine. You, as a British person, do you feel that you have a duty to support Palestinians?
Well, in a sense, if we're going to start addressing British guilt generally around the world, I mean, you're walking around with an enormous burden on your shoulders. Whether I don't know if I'd characterize it as a duty, but certainly I just personally recoil from the sort of pressure and the obligation to, and you get this within the Labour Party as well, to effectively be an ally and an apologist for Israel. Certainly that pressure and that assumption is something I instinctively react against.
We also know that in the film, we know that Israel targeted journalists. Some of them are Al Jazeera journalists. So many of them are freelance journalists and citizen journalists. So we know that Israel is capable of targeting journalists. Does that make you wary or intimidated?
I mean, it is appalling, the targeting of journalists in the Gaza Strip. It's appalling that the international journalistic community has not stood by these people more. I mean, I actually want to draw attention to a specific thing. The International Women's Media Foundation was going to award Maha Husseini the Courage in Journalism Award. And under pressure from sort of various right-wing sort of Zionist publications, it withdrew it. With the Courage in Journalism Award, with no apparent sense of irony. I mean, which I just find absolutely breathtaking. Absolutely breathtaking. The Al Jazeera journalists killed, it's quite clear they've been targeted. And you just look at the circumstances of how they were killed. It's quite clear it's deliberate. And also, for ourselves, for Western journalists, occasionally we'll find ourselves in situations where, it's a bit nerve-wracking and what have you. It never occurs to us they're going to murder our children, which is what they do to Palestinian journalists in the Gaza Strip. I mean, while Dadou, the bureau chief for Al Jazeera's family, they wiped out his family. And anyway, they were killed, and other Al Jazeera journalists have had family members killed as well. It's appalling.
That reminded me of the time of the March of Return, and I was a fixer to some foreign journalists, And one of the journalists I worked with, he came one day to Gaza and he was terrified. I told him what happened. And he said he was stopped at Ben Gurion airport and they told him, the Israeli soldiers there, they told him, we know who you are. Be careful. And then he said, I'm a journalist. They said, yes, but we make mistakes. And he's a foreign journalist. He's not a Palestinian journalist. Exactly. So he was intimidated. He was, every time we would go to shoot at the March of Return, he would just pray. And then he would go and he would wear his vest. Do you think this documentary will make an impact? Do you think you will use it for the international
I mean, I hope so. I think it's a bit like, the first film we did as well on Corbyn and the anti-Semitism thing. And we're really making it for history so that it's there as the historical record. And it's a huge, great lump of truth that hereafter everyone's going to have to navigate their way around. And I think it's probably a slow burn thing. It ties into the broader question of, when will the West's perception and its sort of cognitive dissonance with Israel end? And at that, I'm always torn with. I mean, sometimes I think there'll be a sudden tipping point, and it'll be generational, where suddenly just one morning in newsrooms around the world, everyone's like, hang on, what on earth is going on here? Other times I think it's just going to drag on for decades, and the enormous power of the Israel lobby. But I think if I was Israeli, one of the things that would really terrify me is the campus protests in America, which so often are led by young Jewish people. The degree to which they're losing young Jewish people in the West, I think is of massive concern to them.
Are we expecting another documentary soon?
Well, I hope so. I've got to work for a living, haven't I? And I'd love to do something. If there's anyone out there who wants to employ me, I'd love to do something picking apart the historic roots and evolution of the relationship between the West and, above all, of course, the United States and Israel. I think that would be really fascinating to absolutely pick that apart.
Having worked on all of this footage and documentary and many documentaries on the war in Gaza, what is your message to the Western journalists?
I think there are conceptual problems. Western journalists really need to come afresh at Israel and put their preconceptions apart and just look at it for the solid facts, But on another level, it works even more simply than that, with the human shields thing. It's just basic journalism, okay? Really basic journalism. Don't keep reporting that Hamas uses the Palestinian population as human shields. When you as I say, just employ a 22-year-old researcher to do a bit of fact-checking for 10 minutes. It's really criminally basic. And when the Israelis claim that Hamas are hiding in UN schools, again, just do basic fact-checking there. There's not a single proven case of this. So, but going back to the first film we did, Corbyn and anti-Semitism, just do your job. Really basic stuff. Really basic stuff. Just check your facts.
Because bad journalism kills.
Yeah, no, exactly. In this instance, it does. And they're massively complicit.
Richard, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ahmed. And next time I'll interview you again.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you.
As Israel attempts to erase the Palestinian people under the cover of darkness, targeting journalists and censoring the press, we must rise from the ashes. At Palestine Deep Dive, we are building a multimedia space where our voices, the Palestinian voices, are always front and center. And right now, we just need 3,000 more of you to join our regular supporters and back our work so we can rapidly expand our output. Help us build the future of journalism. Become a supporter at PalestineDeepDive.com/support. This is 100% independent media powered by you.